Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic, and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders, and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hi, and welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science. We're in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant, erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. I'm your host, Dr. Pavini Moray. I want to say thank you so much for all of the beautiful emails you've been sending. It's good to hear how these conversations are landing for you, the way you are weaving these healing technologies that guests share into your life. That's what Bespoken Bones is here for, to support you in your sovereignty, choosing the life that you really want to live rather than what is dictated to you. I am excited to talk to you a little bit about my new project, Wellcelium. The vision that my ancestors have shown me is that planetary change starts with embodiment. It starts with placing our lives into context of well and elevated bloodlines. Change starts with how we treat ourselves on the inside when no one's watching. Change is located at the intersection of longing, practice, and support. And to change how we are with the earth, we must change relationally. The greatest casualty of capitalism is egalitarian relationship. And somehow, some way, we have all got to learn to be skillful in relationship with ourselves, with our people, and with our other than human kin. The denigration of pleasure has been profound. We've been sold a lie to trade true pleasure for momentary numbness, and this serves capitalism in so many ways. So Wellcelium is in service to pleasure and to relationality. Through ethical teaching, using leading educational design principles, we're educating humanity to feel more, to play better, and to belong. And so over the coming weeks, we'll be rolling out many different types of offerings, classes, writings, blogs, tools for deepening, even a new podcast. And because you love Bespoken Bones, I welcome your support of Wellcelium. And what you can do right now is to go to our website and sign up for our mailing list, www.wellcelium.org. That's WELLCELIUM.org. And I'm so delighted to share this with you and really looking forward to learning together in new ways. Okay, so now on with the show. Today, it's such a treat for me to be able to introduce you to Malika Imhotep. Malika is a Black feminist writer and performance artist from Atlanta, Georgia, currently pursuing a doctoral degree in African diaspora studies at the UC Berkeley with a designated emphasis in new media. Her dissertation project tends to the relationships between Black femininity, Southern vernacular aesthetic, and the performance of labor in the Dirty South. Her creative praxis is invested in a textual and embodied interrogation of the primitive, the erotic, and the drag of the Black past in and through the present. I had the privilege of watching her performance arts last year. She has a character, Lil Cottonflower. And through Lil Cottonflower, she creates performance works that draw from burlesque, Black diasporic dance, Afro-diasporic spiritual traditions, folklore, and historical anecdotes. As she courts her own personal liberation through these public plays in sensual expression, her acts invite audiences to confront themselves and everything that they think they know about Black women. She's a co-convener of the embodied spiritual political education project, the Church of Black Feminist Thought, and an open-hearted collaborator on a number of projects at the intersection of creative expression and Black liberation. And I highly encourage you to check out more about Malika and her work at www.blackfeministstudy.org. So join me in welcoming Malika Imhotep to Bespoken Bones. Malika, hi.
Greetings. Hi, I'm happy to be here.
And just hoping that you might start with a story of your people or from your people or through your people of just a relationship that you have with your ancestors and any story that you might be willing to share with the listeners.
I think I come from a storytelling people. Like my father is actually like a storyteller, puppeteer, puppet maker by trade. And he connects that to his like inheritance as the nephew of storytelling folks in Georgia. And I think I was like, oh, I'm going to come and I'm going to tell a folk tale. And I think that is possible. But I also feel like now I'm hearing the necessity to tell like a familial story, and thinking about the ways that I think for a lot of Black folks in the South, from the South, if you go back far enough, right, you touch the plantation, you touch these kind of stories that get muddied by like a lack of, records. But in my family, on my dad's side, we go to, or they have these annual grave cleanings, where we go and it's like a big affair and all these cousins and lots of white paint and people are just really tending to the graves on this family plot. And that family plot is, as I've been told, directly opposite the fields where my family lived and worked. And the kind of matriarch of this line is a woman named Anne Valentine. And Anne Valentine is someone who was, intimately entangled with a white landowner in the South, in that Georgia town that we're from. And I think of a lot, I spend a lot of time trying to untangle the different threads of that story. There's kind of this like gratitude that it gets told with, we have this land because of Anne Valentine, and her relationship to this man who must have loved her, who must have loved us, because look, we still have this land. We still have this cemetery. We still have this land, this earth that holds this moment of our coming together. And I think that for me, I also hear these threads of choice, of like a kind of like intimate negotiation of what survival looks like for like enslaved Black women, and Black women in their legacies, like who have followed after them. I'm thinking about just like, I've even heard that trace of stories like these like matriarchs showing up in like Black women's literature. So I think I'm kind of like spiraling out right now, but the story of Anne Valentine, who is the woman who I like owe a lot of my like material inheritance to when I think about the places or the ways that I'm able to connect to a specific place and time and locate myself as part of a family, and how like there's such like I could give you myth and there's so much folktale that we've offered to make sense of that. But I honestly felt like in this moment saying her name and like was the story itself that felt like it needed to be expressed.
Yeah, thank you. If you would talk a little bit more about what I'm curious about is how you feel on that land. How does your body feel? What do you notice?
Yeah, I think it's also, it's something when you go to a space, like I spent a lot of like I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and this is somewhere in like Perry, Georgia. So it would be a drive. I can remember like long drives to that land. I can remember being young and like, kind of like the restlessness of like, oh, I need to go sit in this tight, hot church, right? Before I get to this moment of kind of anxiety, I think, when I imagine just all the kind of social work of being with like cousins that you don't see every day, and just kind of expected to get into the rhythm of just like, our beautifully abundant country ways of living. I do remember, I feel like I associate anxiety and laughter with that land. And when my father talks about it, he's like, we worked and played, and like there was like the grounds of the plantation were always alive for us. It wasn't just like this kind of mythic place full of death, which it was that, and also a place where life was sustained, cultivated. My dad tells a story about this big tree that used to sit in the field across from the cemetery, and how when he was younger, the women would just gather by that tree and tell each other stories. And he, as younger, as a male child, wasn't necessarily allowed into their circle, but how he just used to aspire to get closer and closer to that. And I think, and now that tree's gone, which is like something that like he's sad about, and something that when I hear his sadness, I feel. But I think that yearning. So there's like an anxiety of like a foreign social rhythm, a foreign natural rhythm that I feel like is my blood. Like I should be in it. I just have to wait for my body to catch up. And also just like a yearning to be close, a yearning to be close to this tree that I can't see anymore, a yearning to hear those stories that I know were once told there. And then the laughter, I think, that comes when you just allow yourself to be present to your aliveness and the shared aliveness. Like it's like all that yearning and that anxiety builds to a point where like laughter and song become the release.
Yeah. I've been reading Bell Hook's Belonging, and what you're saying, some of what you're talking about just resonates with some of the things that I hear her saying about that, what that is, the tension of that relationship with the lands.
Yeah, I think I was even recently thinking about somebody like Alice Walker, who last year there was like this big 75th birthday celebration for Alice Walker in her hometown of Eatonton, Georgia. And that was a place where I believe like she hadn't been since leaving, like in the late 60s or 70s. And I'm sorry if my timestamps are wrong. But there was this way where she even had to concede, like Black folks are so alive here. This place that drove me away. I left during this kind of like turbulent Jim Crow time. This place that I had associated with so much restriction is now a place where I can't deny that my folks, my family, my kin have been able to make life out of. And I feel very like present to that. Like I think homecomings can be complicated always, wherever you're returning to. And I think particularly for like Black folks in the South, where there is such a contentious relationship to what being there, staying there, being stuck there means for us historically, it just brings up a lot of tension, a lot of elastic feelings.
Yeah, it's interesting because like as I hear you talking about it, the image that's coming is around like the diaspora of the diaspora, right? I think you live in the West Coast, yeah?
Well, I'm currently in New Orleans.
Okay. But being away from that, the land where from Atlanta, where you grew, yeah, it's really, it's interesting. And I'm curious of like, how do you take your ancestors with you? I mean, that might sound like a really simple and dumb question, but it's like, how do you, when it's not land-based, how do you find that connection with your people?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of like altar work. How do you find material spaces in your home? And I can say like, even since I went to college, because I left Atlanta, I went to Brandeis University, which is in Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. And even before, and I guess even still now, I don't have much like formal training in what, altarship or building altars looks like. But I've seen them my whole life. And I think that I've recognized just in the way that I make home space, now I have like pictures, of ancestors and things like that. But before, just having things that grounded me, things I like to look at. But now that I'm talking, like, there's like a wall in my mom's kitchen that has always, wherever we live, just been a wall dedicated to ancestors. And I think that just having this relationship to seeing folks around your space definitely helps. I think also recognizing or embracing just what's carried in my body, like when I go to New York, where my mom's family migrated to. So my mom people are like, my mom was the first generation of folks born in the North, but her people came from Augusta, Georgia. But whenever I'm up in New York, which is where all her people are based, they always tell me I have like my grandmother's eyes. I have Sarah's eyes. And so how do I then like take that experience, which I feel like as a teen was kind of like, okay, like, yeah, I got these women's eyes. I've never seen her before. I don't know what to do with that information. But then how do I know that when I look at me, how do I know that every time I'm seeing my face, I'm seeing Sarah's eyes, I'm seeing, George's complexion. I'm seeing just like all these people as they physically manifested themselves, and even in ways that are unseen. I think like in addition to just like altar and spaces and things like that, having just a real embodied knowledge that all these folks are in me, like all these different lines, all these different moments, all these different human relationships had to tangle at an atomic level, or I don't know if I said that right, but like they had to tangle in order for me to be here, to be this vessel for whatever I'm to bring.
I'm just enjoying the idea of looking out through your grandmother's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In reviewing kind of the work that you do and the gifts that you bring, one of the things that I noticed was this fierce commitment to being an academic as well as being a deeply spiritual human, that those things they're not separate. I am referencing, I was watching a piece that you made recently where you were giving an academic presentation and you're also showing Nina Simone videos, and you're dancing and you're building an altar and you're talking, and there's this like, this way that you're weaving all of these threads together. And I'm wondering if you'd speak a little bit about how your relationship with your ancestors, like how does that inform all of that?
Yeah, I think I had to realize, or I'm kind of in this moment of realizing more and more every day that, there was somebody told me a story that must have said that the only way to make a quote unquote legitimate impact was to obtain such and such degree, and that degree would get you in the door, or that degree would authenticate you as you move through the world. And I think what the process of pursuing the degree has actually taught me is that is not the truth. Like, you don't need the degree. I think what this process has allowed me to do is understand what are the things I need to survive. And those things are kind of like the voices of my Black women and femme ancestors, both of my blood and of kind of the greater collective. I know that if I'm going to survive this process, which is isolating, which is demoralizing, which kind of puts the process of a PhD program, to be explicit about it, it's like you trying to force kind of like this abundant spiritual energy into a funnel. And that funnel is supposed to put it in a particular shape that will then go on and perform a specific function in the industry that is the academy. And I think that I'm realizing that my personal spirits, don't want to do that. They're resisting the funnel. And I think the way that I've found to negotiate that kind of tug, and even learn to embrace it, because sometimes, like, there's a lot of conversation amongst scholars of color about imposter syndrome. Or when you enter these spaces, these classrooms, and you feel like you get all these reminders, or everybody wants you to feel like you don't belong, and how we have to push against that and resist that. And I think I've been in a space of appreciating that feeling as a reminder that what I carry is bigger than the space of the academy, is not meant to fit there, you know? And I think that's why it's kind of, as I've been doing this work, you know, I'm dissertating, I'm taking all these exams, and ideally preparation is this quiet, insular thing. And for me, it's actually been a time of outpouring, of finding ways to give my body to the questions that I'm asking academically through performance, of cultivating shared spaces of study and beauty that allow me to not just kind of like vent, but just to, I don't know, let that abundance trickle, let it resist the funnel, like literally just let it go where it needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it. I feel like I'm obviously not a Black woman of color, but I just finished my PhD and I'm like in recovery, right? From the ways that the spirit has to conform. And I really like this idea that you're talking about of like, oh, it's okay that there's parts and spirits that can just resist because it's necessary, right? Yeah, we don't have to give over to, you know, academia, which is, of course, laden with white supremacy, and kind of like all the soul numbing aspects of it. Talk a little bit about the relationship between grief and Black study.
Yeah, you know, I think if we're honest with ourselves, and this is something that kind of came out of me, like my undergraduate Black Studies department at Brandeis last year celebrated its 50th anniversary with a lot of Black Studies departments across the nation because, you know, 1969 was a watermark or watershed year. And the Black liberation movement, when it penetrated, you know, the campuses of these different universities, created like this radical shift in the ways that we could think about knowledge, the way we could practice knowledge. So I think that with that, you can't think of the Black Studies Project as this outgrowth of the Black liberation movement without thinking about folks who have always been trying to understand what it means to be under attack, what it means to have like one's livelihood threatened by the state. Like in California, the ways that, you know, these COINTELPRO documents were talking about responding to unrest, were literally staging occupation, you know? So then what does it mean for young folks who are facing that? Facing, you know, like their colleagues and comrades being murdered. How do they then decide or fight for, you know, classrooms to go into to learn how to make sense of that? So, you know, so I feel like there's kind of the big griefs, you know, we can think about the Middle Passage, you know, we can think about like the slave trade, the U.S. slavery, the slavery throughout the diaspora, as these kind of death industries that kind of mark and touch everything that we think and do. And then we can also think about like the movement of the late 60s and how folks who found themselves in the academy were often trying to navigate or insulate themselves from a certain proximity to death. So I think that I've been trying to learn how to allow the grief that seems to follow and continuously interrupt my pursuit of, you know, intellectual growth and intellectual community. And I'm thinking more immediately about, you know, how since 2015, it seems like we've been in this current cycle of spectacular Black death, like not more or less death, but just like, you know, hyper from Trayvon to Mike Brown to all the other folks whose names we don't hear as often, to all the little deaths. You know, I think that a lot of folks in the world and in the academy are constantly dealing with small deaths that we don't get to announce to our peers, you know, or small losses or small kind of like internal things we're mourning. And I think that I've been trying to find language. It just seems so apparent to me, right, that there's this relationship between the study of Black life and the kind of like overwhelming presence of Black death. And I'm not the only person that says that. There's like millions of brilliant scholars who are saying that same thing right now in this moment. But I think we don't talk about it as a method enough. You know, we don't talk about like, what does it mean to be deep in mourning? And Christina Sharp does this in The Wake. Like, that's kind of like her whole project. But when you're in mourning and trying to like produce thought, you know, it changes the vibration of the thought that you produce. And I think we're in a moment right now where, since we've had all these kind of public and communally shared moments of wrapping our heads around or just reconciling Black death, or the deaths of Black folks, it's changing the way we think and write, the types of urgencies we feel.
Yeah. Thank you. Just wanting to share that when you said like wrapping our heads around Black death, like what came up is like, I don't want to, you know, like meaning like it's not normal, it's not okay. And yeah, and I am so grateful that you're holding the space of grief in the academic world to, you know, to really hold that and to be like, this deserves this kind of attention. And it just seems really meaningful. And like, how can we go forward if I mean, I feel like when I interviewed Bronte, it was the same thing of like the mourning part is so important to the healing part, right? Like, we can't go forward if we're not making spaces for our grief. And if there's no space in a particular environment, like academia, it's like, well, there has to be, we have to make it. And that's what I hear that you're doing, you and your colleagues are doing. Yeah.
So I'm a PhD student in African diaspora studies at UC Berkeley. And my department in particular has strong ancestors, right? We have Barbara Christian, June Jordan, Bebe Clark, as people who were a part of shaping the culture of our program, of our campus, who all passed around the same time under similar conditions. And I think about, what does it mean for literally like the conditions of possibility for my study to be these ancestors, right? These women who certain narratives would say, like, you know, the academy was the cause of some of their dis-ease, right? So I think a lot about just the ways that our relationship to death and grief and the ancestors we keep close, or the ancestors that force us to hear them, shape our intellectual horizons.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And I've had that experience of that there are some that just are very insistent that the truths that they lived in their bodies be truths that continue to be recognized. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that, if you would, about you know, the embodiment of those ones, of the ghosts, of the, you know, and I don't know if you make a differentiation. I do, between well ancestors and the unwell dead, the more ghosty energies, but I'm just curious if you'd speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, you know, I think a lot about this because I think there's a way that I feel in some of my performance work, I've like felt that it clearly was not just me alone moving. You know, I felt that there's like,
Yeah.
I did this one act, and it was kind of like the first little cotton flower burlesque act that I conceived, which was kind of thinking about the figure of Topsy and thinking about like the Black performers that embodied this role on the like vaudeville and minstrel circuits. And there's this line from Ida Forcing, who's like a Black performer from the 19th century, and she described something that, like, a movement that Topsy did, is going over and over and up. And in this book, Babylon Girls, Jana Brown kind of compares her description of over and over and up to the way that, you know, people who saw it were writing over and over and dead. And so I can think about, like, I remember performing in San Francisco, and towards the end of this act, I'm spinning and I'm thinking in my head over and over and up, over and over and up. And kind of in this moment of like invocation, and like I just like fell at the end. And that was kind of what was supposed to happen, kind of like my body just like dropping. And the first breath that I took in like felt like fire. And I just had this moment of like just awareness that is no joke. You know, when you you do these things, you call these names, you think with intention about the different folks that you're inviting into this work or that you're offering this work to. They will come and they will snatch your breath just to show you that they're there for real.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like do you have collaborators, like ancestor collaborators or ancestors, or just in the unseen world, do you have for your performance or for other parts of your work, do you feel like you have those collaborators?
Yeah, and I honestly think it's something that like obviously I think we all do, right? I think that there's like a way that for me a lot of this work and this work of being open as a channel or a vessel it's like they're there. You know, I think a lot about my familial ancestors and how I'm always thinking like I need to get all my cousins to set altars because all these folks keep coming through to this one. We got to diversify, you know, we need to spread it around. But I think that work of making yourself open, all kinds of energies come in. Like I think that like I've written with Anne Valentine a lot as I've reconciled certain things around my like sexual traumas and things that I carry, and just have been trying to work through my relationship. And I can remember even having moments where I like was facing some type of frustration, some roadblock, and would like call in my grandmother. And I feel like since I called in Sarah Moody, she has not left. She's like, oh, okay, you asked, so here we are.
Yeah.
I think on a kind of like my like scholar ancestor that I feel often is Zora Neale Hurston, and I think she sprinkles herself around. Like I think she's like a friendly presence. But I feel her moving me, even when I think about how I'm in New Orleans right now. Like people always ask, and it was a call, you know, it was a call to come back to the South. It was a call to tend to or to look after this painter, Clementine Hunter, right? And in a way, I feel like when I see her work or when I first saw her work, I cried. Like there was just something about, I think, adopting kind of openness as a mode of being in the world that makes me prone to a bunch of different collaborations that last for a long time or a short time, you know, but they come and then, and it's, you know, I feel like I have to take care of my body because I know that it's so prone and susceptible to visitation.
Yeah, I think it's a really special thing to be able to have that openness and at the same time also it sounds like you're good at taking care of yourself and you're mindful about but it's like there is something that's I think, well, first of all, I think you have to really trust, you have to know yourself and you have to trust your own resilience that, okay, I am going to be able to handle this. When shit starts to get weird, I'm going to be able to handle this. And then you can trust yourself to go further out with the unseen ones, right? Of really trusting their lead. And, I'm curious of like, what's something that's really surprised you in those, collaborations with the unseen worlds?
I think, well, the first thing that feels worth saying is that I'm definitely learning. I think there are a lot of times when I yield to the heaviness of it. You know, I think I've witnessed, you know, there's this woman in the Bay, Amara T. Smith, and and she's a performance maker, a conjure artist. And I think that she crafts performances in collaboration with Ellen Sebastian Chang. And their group is called House Full of Black Women. And they offer work that I swear, like, every time I need it, it's there. So it's almost like I know when, like, if I hear Amara them is doing a show, I know that I am in need of some type of something because it holds me in that way. But I think that there's something about understanding that sometimes it closes me off to the outside world. Sometimes I need to be alone. Sometimes I need to be quiet. Sometimes I just have to feel it all. I have to let the tears come. And I'm just juggling. I look to some of my elders in this practice as examples. And I honestly think the production of spirit driven work, whether that's a performative lecture or a piece of performance art or a poem or an essay, even, I think those are kind of some of the channels that allow me to work through that. Okay, this is something that surprised me. So I have not done a lot of work with my paternal energies and ancestors. And I was randomly I had been feeling this shiver thing. I had been having this persistent shiver thing. And it wouldn't even just be sometimes you change temperatures and you feel different. You're oh, okay, my body's adjusting to that. It would just be kind of this I would enter a different space, or I would be in the middle of a conversation and I would get this shiver. And I was like, what is that? What is this telling me? What is this information? And I saw something, I was at a film screening, and there was this really moving moment between a father and a grandfather and one of the protagonists of the film. And I was crying, and I was like, oh snap. Is this tremor that I've been feeling, this guide, this energy that's signaling to me when there's a spiritual presence in the room, maybe that's my grandfather, or maybe that's kind of my paternal contingent. That's how they communicate with me. So they don't send tears. They send kind of this jolt of electricity. And that's been interesting to think with and feel with still. But it's been the fruit, or it just feels like a barometer of sorts. It just kind of tunes me. And so far in my thinking about it, I've located or connected it to my paternal folks.
Uh-huh. That's cool. What does it turn your attention towards when it happens? Or is it just kind of like, hey, pay attention right now?
Yeah, it feels kind of like the ringing of a bell. It's pay attention right now. Or did you heard that? Did you catch that? Did you see what just happened? Sometimes it's you're safe here. Sometimes it's we're here with you. And I've been trying to discern, I think that was another conversation I had with Amara, because I was like, what do you make of a spiritual tremor? And she's like, well, sometimes they feel good, sometimes they feel bad. And you have to be able to have boundaries even, and be able to say not right now.
Yeah.
Or, okay, I hear you. And I think kind of leaning into those practices as well, where it's okay, I acknowledge, even if I haven't processed all the information, I acknowledge that you're here.
Yeah. It's just that call to awareness of ancestral presence, right? Of or just calling us into that ancestral consciousness of oh, here it is, right? Yeah. I love it. I love the tremor as that. And I imagine that folks who are listening have embodied experiences sometimes of ancestors and ancestral energies just kind of showing up and poking and or prodding or shivering or pushing.
Is this what? Okay.
I got pushed.
What's happening?
What's happening? Yeah. I was just thinking of this. I was actually in a graveyard where my people are buried, but the gravestones, the tombstones had disintegrated, and so I didn't actually know where. I had some I know it's this ritual stuff. I'm gonna do this thing. Where's the right place to do it? And I can't figure it out because there's no tombstones. And then I get pushed, right? A physical push on my left shoulder. I'm boom. I'm oh, okay, over there. You want me to go over there? Yeah, it's so, I love that. I always think wow, how much did it cost you to do that? Or how did you do that? Or what were do you need some snacks right now?
That sounds just Alice Walker when she narrates how she went to find Zora Hurston. And she's kind of tracking through this overgrown cemetery and just does not know where to begin or end. And then she says something like, Zora, where you at? I'm only going to ask a couple more times. And then I think her foot sinks into a spot that is obviously a grave. And so that she determines that must be it, and then goes and puts a tombstone there for Zora.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Wow. Well, I want to talk with you a little bit about the erotic, because a big part of your work focuses in the erotic, and I'm really interested in kind of the connection between um, how we relate with our ancestors and how we relate with our sexuality, and that whole thing. And I'm just curious if you want to talk a little bit
Mhm.
about that, as how you experience it. How do you play with it? Like
Yeah.
all of it, the grief, the erotic, the sex, the ancestors, as especially as a Black femme, how do you?
Yeah, I mean, again, all these lessons that I'm like coming into right now, trying to discern and practice. One woman that I write about, Betty Butt, who was a founding member of Twerk Team, which is a crew of dancers from the east side of Atlanta, who kind of like in 2009, so in the early YouTube years kind of rise to fame for like these like really beautiful, impressive twerk videos. So Betty Butt was a member of that group. She left the group in like 2010, 2011, and then like came back with a short-lived solo channel in 2012, and then was actually murdered in 2014 as a result of like I won't say it, like a robbery. Like some folks was trying to rob her boyfriend, and she lost her life as a result. And in her home. And so I think I write about this woman. I write about a video of hers. And one of the things that I've been reckoning with since I started grad school, because this focus and this attention to this video kind of grew out of my first ever attempt at like academic writing, where I was writing about like the relationship between twerk videos and diaspora. But like, what does it mean for me to cite and feel so much joy, so much arousal, so much, like watching her perform invites so much sense into my body, even as I watch her as some type of like instructive, right? Like growing up, being like a Black woman from Atlanta who like grew up in the early 2000s, like there's a real way that like I've learned to script my body following or in response to these videos, right? So then what does it mean for that kind of like sensual, erotic, playful relationship to be interrupted by loss, by grief, by tragedy? And then what does it mean for me to be writing about her, forget about the mourning, and kind of re-fall in love in this new context where I'm thinking about, all the radical possibilities opened up by like, Black femininity and the performance and the erotic, and just like how we could even like queer expectations of the types of labors Black women in films perform. And I'm so like high off the intellectual excitement of that, and then get brought back into grief when I remember or when I come across again this detail that in 2014 she was murdered. And I think a lot about how I've given like little small performative lectures where I'll play this video of hers. And then I talk, about how this woman is a ghost and how like I remember her in my body when I dance, when I fuck, when I like put my makeup on, all these things, because of the ways that her erotic performance invited me to be able to see myself as like a subject and object of desire, because she's like, a dark skinned Black woman from Atlanta. And I think that for me, so I'm like that's the current kind of cross of these questions that I'm sitting with. Like, how do I allow, as I try to write this in a way that is compelling, how do I allow the tangle of desire and grief that inform or that rise in my body when I watch her, when I show the videos in public, even there's even a little embarrassment, or not even embarrassment, but just kind of like vulnerability. I feel vulnerable to it. Like, how do I allow that to show up on the page with me? And in figuring out how I allow it to show up on the page, I also just think about how I carry it, how all the kind of reclamatory work or reclamation work I do as a Black femme is always moving in tandem with these kind of brutal histories of the violences marked onto my body, whether that's by like the slave trade or by the real lived experiences that I had that my maternal ancestors had as well. So, I'm kind of like, it's a question that I feel a lot of energy towards. So it excites me in a bunch of different directions. But I think a lot just about the erotic as articulated by Audre Lorde and as kind of lived by, I think, just like a deep, deep legacy of Black women and femmes transnationally and probably like in outer space too. Um, of knowing that there's a deep power in our bodily knowledge. You know, Barbara Christian writes, like sensual language is language that makes sense. And like that's what I need. Like that's the writing I need to save my own life. And I think about that every day. Like, what does it mean to know deeply that it's not about ignoring or escaping or like forgetting about the traumas that have constituted us, but about kind of coming into a different relationship to those scars, right? So like, I also sometimes I feel like I talk like that woman in A Wrinkle in Time who like just talks in quotes, you know. I forget who she is, but because I think a lot about Black women's literature, so they're always in my mouth. And there's this scene in Beloved by Toni Morrison where Paul D is like kissing Setha's back. And Setha is like this woman who has escaped enslavement, has escaped being kind of like fondled and assaulted by the like young boys on the plantation. She's escaped so much. And in her decision to not have her children go through that, she slices her baby girl's throat. And so the whole novel is kind of reckoning with that act, which is inspired by this actual archival incident, the life of Margaret Garner. But in that moment, Toni Morrison gives them or gives Setha or articulates through Setha like just the relief it felt to have her breast held and to have somebody move their lips and tongue across the scars on her back. And I think for me that's such a deliciously erotic moment. And it's not about forgetting the scars, but actually about tending to them with softness, you know, with desire, and knowing that's what needs to be done right now, you know?
Just breathing into that. Yeah. I love the idea that you're bringing, that it's not separate, right? That there's not a separation. This idea that you're bringing, that there's not this separation, right? That we either get to have joy or grief, or we either get to have desirousness or we get to have violence, that it's all interwoven. And the, bringing the sensual aliveness is about the celebration and the recognition of it all, right? It's like, cause often I find that like, folks are like, okay, well, once I've dealt with my trauma, then I'm going to be erotically free. I'm like, yeah, well, that could be true, or maybe it's not. What if it's not? What if those things don't go in that order that you think they're going to go in? And what I hear you saying is like the coexistence of really developing capacity for complexity of all of the different ways that it is to be human in a bot and have a body and exist in a particular context in a particular moment, and find that aliveness with all of that complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's not either or. Like I think a lot about in my performance work as Lil Kindflower, right? Like there are moments where I really do truly feel empowered and liberated, and like my relationship to my body is enriched by these kind of like public acts. And also there's an aftershock. There's an aftermath. There's like the heaviness of having let these things move through my body. There's the awareness of my vulnerability in either the literal space of the room I'm in or just kind of in a bigger sense. What does it mean to be like a Black femme stripped down in public? And I think it means everything. It really means everything. It means you're vulnerable. It means you're powerful. It means it just means a whole world. It means the whole world. And I've been reading a lot of like Black feminist performance artists lately, just articulating that and how it is like a slow and painful process. And it's not something that like, it's just such a cycle, you know, like you were saying with this like healing thing. Like I learned, my feet are being dragged over the coals for that lesson of like, you don't just get this victorious moment of having healed all your trauma and now you're just free. Like I felt my freest, my most erotic, my most like sexually present. And as a result of being able to face the moments where I'm reminded, where I'm revisited, you know.
Malika, I want to thank you so much for your work in the world and your time to come on Bespoken Bones and talk about these really, really important things. And just want to ask how folks can follow you. How can they get in touch with your work and be aware of you?
Right. So I think the best way, or my most like public facing project at the moment, is the Church of Black Feminist Thought. And you can follow that, which is my collaboration with this wonderful, wonderful artist, Deanster, spirit maker, life maker, even Miyuki Baker. And you can follow us or find more information about that at blackfeministstudy.org and also Black Feminist Study on Instagram.
Fantastic. And from looking at those things, you all have events fairly regularly. You have a couple that are coming up in the next couple of months, I saw.
Yeah, so we have, we're in collaboration with the Oakland Museum of Art, and that's happening in April. And then we have like some little pop-up things happening here and there. We're kind of in this moment of like transformation and like seeing we've had a spread. Like I'm living in a different place. Miyuki is moving in the world in a different capacity. So we're like growing. We're in this really beautiful moment of expansion. So the social medias are the best place to keep up with our.
Okay. That's great. And there's a book that looks exquisite.
Yeah, the Theory Atlas, which is our baby. And it's available. It's basically like the collective ruminations from 12 months of us gathering as a study group in Berkeley and Oakland. And Miyuki and I took all the notes from these communal gatherings and generated theory maps, which are just these really beautiful points of access to navigating the works of folks like Toni Morrison, Ntozake Shange, Eula Taylor, Amara Smith. And a lot of that work, just because it's like when we were honoring Toni Morrison, Ntozake Shange, like we were moving. I think we honored Ntozake like the month before her passing. So there was just like a really deep spiritual work in the way that those thinkers asked for their honor in the times and places that they did.
Yes, and it's visually stunning, and as you said, points of access into some amazing Black femme ancestors and their work. So folks should get that and check you out. And I just again want to say thank you, and the blessing of you and the blessing of your life is vast, and I am blessed to know you. And just thank you.
Thank you so much.